it was certainly either in the winter or early spring that I heard about the planning for the peace encampment. And I got word, I really can't tell you how, maybe through a letter, maybe through a phone call, from somebody in New York who said, or Albany, because there were a number of people trying to form a media collective as part of the planning for the Women's Peace Encampment. And right away, I mean, I was doing documentary work, I was a feminist, I was interested, and it's just, of course, I'll get involved with that. And there was a planning meeting that happened on the land sometime that spring. I don't know if it was April or May, maybe early June. Probably there was more than one meeting before the 4th of July opening. And there was, I don't remember how many, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 women from a number of different towns and cities, as well as women from Boston, or representatives from the Boston Women's Collective, Video Collective, who came for that planning. And if I should go on about that, what the two ideas about it were in terms of media, or three perhaps, but to document everything we could that went on, but also to be some kind of liaison with the outside media. I mean, there were different issues involved. One was how to prepare press releases and get the word out to the national media, or local and national media, and the other was internal, documenting ourselves. So a different part of documenting the events was to also train other women with media. So there were training workshops as well, getting other people involved in documentation. Not the scale of it or the length of it, no. I have to say, maybe this as an overview, in retrospect, I think there were just a lot of things in the planning that were very naive, and that we came to find, didn't work, things that didn't work at all. The problems with the conflicts with local residents, and I don't think a lot of that was taken into account. The way that the issues around the flag and not flying the American flag, became very contentious, and made it more difficult in terms of relations with the local residents and so on. And with the media, the way the media generally picked up on, lifestyles, shall we say. So I think there were a lot of things that were attempted in the planning that couldn't really be thoroughly foreseen in many ways. So yeah, I didn't foresee a lot of the things that happened, and I think a lot of people in planning did not. Could not. In many ways it was just fantastic. The number of people who turned out, the organization of the place, all the volunteer efforts, people bringing families, camping, people willing to do a lot of labor and contribute. I mean, it was, there were just wonderful things about it. The women from Europe who came, England and Wales and Italy and so on, all of whom we filmed. So I was very kind of directly there, minute by minute, aware of how immediate and how urgent the issues were. It's, the scale of it in that sense was terrific, in the fact that it drew a lot of attention to the issues of the cruise and approaching missiles possibly being stored there, and just the growth of a women's peace movement in the moment it was happening, in the moment that it was spreading, from the initial women in Europe, Europe's involvement. Well, yeah, I remember that being an issue, but on the other hand, I think accommodations were made. So, okay, well, the men can be on the front lawn and do interviews there. You know, there was a certain area that was okay for the outside media. Now that you mention it, I think it was just the front lawn and maybe the front of the house or something for interviews. And otherwise, only women's media could get on the land itself, beyond the front lawn. I don't know how much of an impact that really had. What was important at the time was we thought, well, we've got to get the word out that this is going on. And part of the idea of the Media Collective was to record things that were happening and get those things out to public access TV stations, local TV stations, and news, you know, within New York State, let's say at least, and then Boston, you know, was very active. So those things happened. We have local public access here, but of course, it still was kind of a regional news event in that way, just in the same way that the Ithaca Journal regularly covered the important events there. And I think actually they did a pretty good job. They didn't have some of the biases that some other news media expressed. For a few years after the beginning of the event, I remember speaking with Lori Bronstein in Philadelphia at a conference on women in the media, and we were invited to talk about the specific event of the Media Collective on the Women's Peace Encampment. And so in that context, you know, we were talking about collectivity, we were talking about women's media needing to happen through these kind of grassroots collectives. You know, and that was the era, too, of that. It wasn't so much a new idea as a new form of political collective work. I don't know how far that influence carried. You know, there were women in media in other respects speaking at that conference who, you know, were talking about how to get their work out and how they had struggled in their various venues of whatever, television or film or community work, documentary, you know, mainstream media, and what their struggles were. So, I mean, I think the work in our talk was very well received in terms of, you know, thinking about collective power, that there was still the idea that there was some empowerment to happen in training other women, getting more, you know, there are people who are teaching, it's like getting women, giving them the support. But the existing institutions in television and film, it's still very, very hard for women in media. And now it's, what, 30 years ago? That's a really interesting question, too, and something I've thought about and written about a lot at that time, especially. And because I've been involved in documentary a long time, this issue of the participant or the observer, and whether you can be a participant/observer, and how that works. And one of the things I always bring up when people talk about this is at Seneca how, for example, the women's media filmed the arrests when women went over the fence, because there you're actively documenting a moment where there could be abuse, physical abuse, and just having a camera on actually may be preventing that. So that is certainly participating. I mean, that's a way in which you're not trying to be either neutral or a distant observer of an action. You're actually trying to intervene through the media to prevent something that, you know, would be illegal or unfair. I mean, these women who were going over the fence were expressing an act of civil disobedience, and they made those choices, but they didn't have to be physically hurt in the process. So we tried to do that. When there were rallies or marches, being in it with a camera is different from being outside, like most of the other media, looking from the outside in. And you have a different result of that. I mean, in a lot of the footage in Stronger Than Before, you would feel like you're involved in it because the camera and the camera women were were inside of it, not outside of it. So there's a combination of being and that's the participant / observer. You're not really detached. It doesn't mean you're not being fair. You're always trying to go for some kind of honesty or justice about it, but you have a point of view, and you work through that point of view because you care about the issue. So it's not like being a journalist writing about it who's saying, this happened, but also that happened, and this happened, and that happened. You try to be fair, but not cold. How else to put it? I just felt that the kind of skills I had were better put to use in that way. Just as, if somebody knew how to do the plumbing, better that they did that than me. I remember filming civil disobedience training, and so having a tape of that somebody who came the next day could look at was maybe more valuable than my doing so. It isn't that I couldn't have done both, but I would be probably tossing off the camera in order to do it. You see what I mean? It's just having a specialization and knowing where to put your best energies. That was the choice I made. You probably know there are often quite a schedule of events going on every day, and because I wasn't camping there, because I lived close enough I could go, I would say two things happened. Either I would just go because I was free on a Saturday or weekend, whatever, or midweek, and could go, and then I'd go to the office and check in with other women who were there with cameras and find out what was going on. Oh, there's going to be a workshop on civil disobedience at 3 o'clock. I mean, so some of it was wandering around shooting and discovering and just talking to people, and sometimes it was scheduled events. But the other whole thing was I would get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning at my house, hey, there's going to be, a demonstration or something, or there's going to be I can't remember all the different things that happened, but a protest or something that was going to be a surprise rally of some sort, or an act of civil disobedience, and it's going to happen at 8 o'clock. Can you get here? And so that was like, whew, pack it up, call Lori, are you available? We're going to go. Do you want to drive up? Just go up there, and sometimes it was like finding the right fence, around the other side of the depot, and just getting there quick enough to pack, set up and shoot. So sometimes, it was our choice, my choice, prioritizing. We haven't done any interviews with people who are painting the barn, or, building a new structure, or talking about the media, or whatever. So, it was a mix. I also took tons of still photographs. So I always had, another still camera with me, and just tons of pictures of whatever was going on. Well, I'm sure we put some up on our own funds. I was working with public access. I had my own camera, so that was not a problem. But they did have a practice of reusing, recycling tapes, and because we were running this stuff on local public access, it is possible we got some used tapes from them, for free, and I just don't recall. But in those days, I was shooting, everything I did was 3/4. And so I had a stock of 3/4 tapes. Lori was shooting in 3/4, and we had a mix of all those things. Well, public access TV for one, and a deck. I mean, I would sometimes bring up this huge 3/4-inch deck of mine that I had bought used, and bring it up. We would do some events. I even saw one of the pictures on the website, and I know because it's my old little TV that I would bring to the encampment. sometimes we would just be asked to bring, you know, oh, could you bring the thing from 2 weeks ago because people are coming from somewhere, and could we show them that? So it was either something that was already set up and we would just bring tapes, or I remember several times lugging up my 3/4 deck and a TV. And I remember that in that picture, because I wouldn't necessarily have remembered it, but there is a photograph of it. And I thought, oh yeah, we set it up under that tree, and we, you know, ran a extension into the house, and you know. So there were just so many things that happened. It's, you know, it's like, oh, maybe on Hiroshima Day, something particular was happening there to commemorate it, and they wanted to show certain things. That's the kind of thing that would just come up, and even the next year, you know. Like I showed you that I had found some VHS tapes from the 5-year anniversary, the 1 year and the 5-year anniversary. Yeah. Yes. Well, when we had the planning meetings and all the women who were representatives of all the women who planned to work together in a collective, we had a little red T-shirt. I should have brought it, but you've probably seen it. Oh, yeah. I still have mine in my closet. It's a little small now, but we used to wear these red shirts. It had, you know, a logo that the Boston Women's Collective, I think, came up with or printed, or maybe it was, no, I don't remember who came up with it. But it just said Women's Video Collective, and had a little image of a woman with a camera on the front. And everybody made their own version of it, you know, tore off various parts. And anyway, I remember that at one of those meetings we all got those shirts, and we all wore T-shirts, and we wore them, and so that we could be recognized, and other women there would know, oh, this is somebody from the Media Collective. And for example, somebody could come up and ask us if they wanted to be interviewed. Say, oh, is there any chance we've come here from, you know, Seattle, and we want to talk to you about our experience here. So it worked in both directions. But as far as sharing tapes, that group that planned agreed that we were going to try to disseminate the material and pool it, basically. So we copied the tapes that we shot and gave the Boston Women's Collective those copies so that they could use that material in Boston. They could edit with it, they could put it on their public access TV or whatever. And I think gradually we got copies of some of their tapes, or, you know, and eventually I have somewhere a whole box of dubs of their material. And they edited one woman, I can't think of her name right now, I'm sure you know, who was not part of that collective, that a woman in Boston, they got to edit all that material, you know, with a somewhat neutral eye. And Lori and I edited a piece here, and I remember we submitted it to Women Make Movies, and they said, well, we like it, but we've already taken the one from Stronger Than Before, had a very what's the word? I don't want to say conventional in a bad way, but it had a clear voiceover explaining all the events. And ours was a different kind of piece. It had no voiceover. So it was not as expository, you know, and factual in its explanations. It went through the events kind of as an experiential thing. It began with Buddhist drum beats and so on. I mean, it's that kind of thing. It was more to take you into the mood and the events that happen in a kind of direct experience, a second to direct experience. I think we all thought something final would come out of it, or some version of it would be edited later, and the logic of it was that, you know, an official one would come out of the Boston Collective, because at that point they had a number of people involved who worked regularly at the studio and in editing at I don't think it was Boston per se, I think it was Somerville maybe. Was it? Yeah. So, you know, they had a real core group there that could deal with a final version. But we all had sort of the liberty to use whatever material in our own ways. So
Is that unusual?
Yes, very. Very, very. Like no money was involved. No, you know, it was all voluntary. It was all making copies for each other somehow, maybe through public access or other gear. And I think that generally was true, but that kind of collective work, it's not typical at all. I mean, it's reasonable and typical that film or video may be worked on collaboratively. You know what I mean? Or that it takes a crew, or, you know, but usually there's some hierarchy involved and a lot of financial issues involved, and this was completely a collective project. It seemed completely in tune with that time and that kind of energy and that kind of empowerment feeling. You know, women in particular were going to make a difference, you know, in terms of changing the political landscape, you know, and that the peace movement is one kind of thing, but the women's peace movement was kind of a fresh start, and people speaking up, and, you know, the fact that the government wouldn't affirm or deny the existence of the weapons there, it's like you couldn't ignore it when this constant presence of protest was there. So I think that you know, what was started by the Welsh women from Wales in England and in Cosimo in Italy, you know, that inspiration from them really sparked a very large movement here, which did make a difference. I think it did. I mean, the ideas about converting the depot at that time were like, seemed like people thought it was so far-fetched, and now look at it. That's all happened now. That's pretty amazing. You know, and I think that even though the government wouldn't at that time admit that there were weapons there, you know, that eventually they were dismantled, and I have to think that that was a piece of it.
Right.
Yeah, I think I had a general awareness. I think we heard about that leak, I think it was through one of the Rochester newspapers, about the cruise and Pershing missiles, about Seneca being a transshipment point for storage, and that was the specific thing that was like, whoa, these are really here, and why did we know about that, or why won't they say it's true or false? If they won't say it's false, then they're probably there. So I think that's, I was aware that much, you know, with that kind of news leak, you know, that's why this was being organized around Seneca. You know, way before that, when I was a college student in New York, you know, we were regularly involved in marches in the city, anti-war marches, peace rallies. But I don't mean I was highly political, but I mean that was just the texture of the times. You know, one's politics was like obvious. But as far as missiles and you know, nuclear missiles, it's part of the larger picture, you know, of being for peace and against war. I was not there at on that date. Laurie Bronstein, who worked with me from Ithaca, was there and did film there. That was part of the footage that got pooled for both the Stronger Than Before video and ours. I think some of the interviews that are in that film about that was some of the most powerful stuff. I can't remember if Laurie did some specific interviews or was part of those interviews. You know, sometimes things were happening and you'd have 3 or 4 cameras in the same spot, you know. So, you know, we did a lot of interviews at the late end of the summer, you know, generally with just one-on-one interviews. You know, that collectivity thing, it works in a lot of ways, you know. Sometimes we just helped each other out. Oh, can you do sound for me, you know, and so it may not be footage that we shot, but maybe did sound for, or just helped hold a camera or something. Well, you know, Ithaca is a pretty progressive town compared to many of the rural areas right around it. And it doesn't mean it was kind of one mind, but the majority of people, I think, understood the kind of energy that was going into Seneca and the peace encampment, and many people from Ithaca were involved in it and went up for it. So I think there was generally a positive view of it, and as I said, the Ithaca Journal did a good job of covering it, and I think in a positive way. But I think in the rural areas around, there was a lot of, dissent about it. And who are these women, and having a very negative idea about whatever it was, witches, lesbians, commies, and that was just the division of the times, and not lack of understanding of different. I hate the word lifestyles, but that was used a lot. Well, we filmed a lot of things that were quite frightening. I mean, there were very often, on the 4th of July opening day, there were quite some issues, and a number of people on motorcycles driving by the front of the house, making a lot of noise, carrying American flags, yelling, sometimes at the gate of the depot. There'd be a regular group of locals, and we often talked with them, we just chatted. And I think it was very interesting now, and I'm recalling some conversations, because there'd be kids there too. Teenagers hanging out, maybe they had their bicycles or something, and they were checking it out. They were as curious as they were told it wasn't a good thing. Do you know what I mean? And because there were young teens and older teens who, were often there. And they weren't yelling and protesting, but if you asked them, what they thought of things going on, they, it's not right, this is America kind of thing, but you felt they were spouting their parents' line, and yet there was this sort of burning curiosity to observe who these people, women, and not only women, of course, but they had their minds still open, I think. I don't know that I ever felt personally endangered. I don't want to exaggerate it. I don't want to do the Hillary Clinton thing of saying shots were fired and I had to run on the tarmac. That didn't happen, So, I think there was a sense of protection in the group. That, because there was always that thing about for women who were going to enact some form of civil disobedience, there was already this, okay, when you get arrested, I am your backup. I will come to the jail. I will get the lawyer. I will do whatever. So that was a wonderful thing about a lot of the planning, which was that people knew they were going to be supported. They weren't going to be alone if they trespassed or whatever. So that was really important. And I think people were empowered by that to participate in actions, because they knew they had the group support. And it wasn't random or like, I hope somebody helps me if I get arrested. No, they knew somebody was going to be there for them. Of course, physically, some of the counter-protesters were very, very aggressive. And I guess it was like tension, I would say, rather than like fear for my life. We often use the camera as a kind of intermediary to lower when people realize whatever their actions are, they're being documented and could be used as evidence against them. And I think that helped. So it wasn't like we were trying to get the worst thing as a spectacle, but to actually, chill people down. And Lori actually got some of the toughest footage When I wasn't there on the August, was it August 4th?
First.
August 1st action. And one of the most bitter yelling protests. So where you had the division of, you had the police, and you had protesters on one side, and I mean the women protesters on one side, and then the local counter protesters on the other. And it's pretty vehement. It's pretty strong. Lots of yelling, and the response from the women was often singing. There wasn't electricity in a lot of places. If you went with a battery pack, you had a very short amount of time. Maybe you should be shooting 20-minute tapes, and if you know what I mean. So so you always had to have lots of batteries charged, and the equipment was heavier then, quite a bit. And if the weather was bad, well, then you might film inside the barn or in the house, or not film at all. Oh my God, we went from Boston to there. Oh, we have extra tape if you run out of tape, you know what I mean? So there wasn't that kind of lack of material. But as I said, we did do a lot of training sessions too. And so part of it was a challenge of just getting other people who were interested in doing some documentation up to speed. And we'd occasionally just set up a workshop, and put it on the schedule, at 3 o'clock today. Well, there were enough people there to do it, maybe, two women from Boston and from Ithaca or somebody from New York, and say, oh yeah, well, we can do a training session today, let's do it, So a lot of it was kind of spontaneous. I don't recall any time. I mean, when you're gathering so much stuff, so much information, you're not worried that generally that one particular thing is going to be good enough because you've got already too much to deal with. But then there are certain events that are crucial, right? And then you say, well, we got to get this. And usually it was done from multiple sources. I do remember that on opening day, there's some wonderful footage of that, and it's in Stronger Than Before as well, of the speeches that were made at the beginning. There was a Native American woman who spoke and who blessed the land and so on. And that day, I just remember when we set up the audio for it, we had really wanted to get the speeches well, and there was a huge crowd. And we were, maybe it was Judy Kellerman or something, I think we were setting up 2 cameras, to get one from one angle and from the front. And we were getting some sound canceling, and use multiple mics. You can get the sound that was like, we were really frantic. And then we solved the problem and we went ahead and got it. It's the only problem I can remember. And I think when we were training people, they just helped temporarily. I don't remember any tragedies over that. No, it wasn't that difficult. The hardest part was that everything was heavy. And if you were going to run around all day in the summer, it was hot. But you tend to forget those things afterwards. It's just at the time, it's a bit of a struggle. Yeah. I'm thinking of some photographs that I'm sure you would love to have, but I'd have to find them and get them to you. These days, probably I could scan them and just send you JPEGs of them. But what was occurring to me, and I think on the website there are a couple of pictures that include, there's a woman from England who was in a lot of the sort of dramatized. Cassie, that sounds right.
The young, very young.
Very pale, and sometimes would be sort of painted up. Yeah. And there was a die-in, some extreme pictures of the die-in with a group of women kind of and that's in the video as well, but some really big poster pictures. I had an exhibition years later of stills from Seneca, so I have a whole portfolio that was in a show, and I remember those are very dramatic pictures people always commented on. And that woman Cassie, the very big picture of her that was my poster actually for that show, and it actually kind of looks somewhere between a Holocaust victim in it, but it's obviously face painted, so it's a little dramatized. And there's a fence behind her and so on and so on. When I went up on my own a year later, somebody could have been Jody, it could have been Michelle Crone, might have called me and said, do you know we're going to get together for some event for the first anniversary. So I just went up, should be done. Yeah, get something. Maybe it'll be useful. And yeah, I didn't edit a project after that first year. It's possible I ran stuff on public access. Yeah, I mean, it's just like right now, okay? So it's 25 years later, and people see this is a valuable archive of historical information that should be preserved. You're doing it, right? So, it's one of those things. I don't throw away negatives either, It's like, well, maybe someday somebody will have a use for this. And here it is, Yeah, I mean, you do things at the time because they have a very specific sort of purpose and energy behind them and interest of other people's interest. After that, you're on to the next thing and the next thing. I mean, there could be a thread that goes through them. I mean, I've done a lot of work on feminist issues and labor issues and women artists and so on. So for me, there's a thread, but in terms of following through on the women's peace encampment, that's kind of fizzled out until now. That's a good question. I just did an anti-war piece, actually. You see that? I did a video installation on a parachute. I had I bought a used parachute. I had proposed this project up at Cornell, and in a particular space is very high. And we rigged this parachute. And what I did was, I do a lot of work with dance and dancers. So my idea is, things are falling apart again. I mean, we are in a war, and while there may be some partisan politics now that are involved with the issues, but for the last, 5 or 6 years, there hasn't been an effective protest movement going on, So in my little way, it's just gets us all down that this war is still dragging on. And so I actually took World War II footage, documentary footage of parachute drops and bomb drops and so on from World War II that I was able to compile, and some footage from dramatized war footage from John Attenborough's film from the 70s called A Bridge Too Far, and it was a color Panavision film, very different looking from the World War II footage, but it had the largest parachute drop ever filmed. And so I used this dual projection, and I worked with this dancer who, she's a ballet dancer, very, very wonderful dancer, and she leaped on a trampoline for me. So I could film her with the sky behind her and use all the falls from her leaps. And so her falls, she's constantly falling, superimposed with these parachute drops and bomb drops and so on. And those are on a parachute. So you'd walk under this parachute and be surrounded with this sense. So at a certain level, it was quite beautiful, but on the other hand, it's about bombs falling and the fall of what war means in terms of everything falling to pieces. So I guess, in a certain, very different format, the issue is still very important to me. At Cornell, I would say, because I've been teaching film there for 28 years, and my students make their original work, whatever it is they want to make. And I certainly have seen times when students have gotten involved again in political issues, like the, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was a big reaction to Cornell's investments in South Africa and being sort of participating in apartheid in that way. And there was a big protest in building a shanty town right near the administration building. And I had a couple of students who who filmed that while it was happening. And, there would always be some students who would find that really important to do. Right now, I don't have a single student thinking like that, which is kind of shocking. I shouldn't say that. I have one student who's involved with violence against women and is interested in doing a project currently on that. And these things, they have to be revisited over and over, right? And the problem hasn't gone away. But there'll be, years where nobody's doing that kind of work, and then you'll have a wavelet of some political issue. A couple of years ago, we did a collective project, actually, that's interesting. There was a group at Cornell, a couple of professors in different departments, and some of their students decided that they were going to do a teach-in about Guantanamo. They actually built, they got permission to do it right on the art squad at Cornell, which is pretty amazing. And a few other people documented this. And although I knew about the event, it was like during the next year that they said, we have all this video footage, can you help us edit a piece out of it? And the whole idea was not only the issue of the incarcerated folks at Guantanamo who were not getting legal representation, but also that students had organized this project to put it out in front of other students. So we did that. We formed a whole group. We got a number of student filmmakers involved to help edit this piece as a group. So we had people who had participated in the events, and then people after the fact who learned about it. I mean, that was partly what was great, is that they had to catalog all the footage and figure out an editing structure and learn about it in the process themselves. So that's kind of cool. But those are very sporadic cases of sort of political documentary that students are interested in these days. They're all making narrative films about love triangles and suicide and that kind of thing. Well, there was so much. It was a really big event, and as I say, now we kind of look back, and whatever our politics are, there was still a naivete about it that I have to say, I don't want to kind of, say I was into the whole goddess thing or anything like that. There were edges of it that I was not tuned into. But I think the essential politics of it were very, very important, And it was very exciting, great energy there. The work, the ideas about sustainability, about women working together and learning skills, like, building ramps for the handicapped. And, it was just, it had a nice, terrible word, a holistic sense about all kinds of things that could be done and reorganized in a better way. Healthy food, healthful food collective, people, if they came for the day, they had to work for 2 hours or something. And they could choose whatever interested them to do or needed being done. And so it was a kind of, that wonderful kind of non-hierarchical, the whole thing, that consensus decision-making was so important, so interesting to see how it actually could work. It was a very key thing we haven't talked about at all, I think. And what a long and laborious process that is, but how important to do it that way. And I think for a lot of women that I know who are teachers, who teach differently because of that kind of experience, or who, just have that kind of belief system that, it's inclusive. Everybody gets to have input. Everybody gets to listen to everybody. Everybody comes to decision making through a fair process, which is, equivalent to grassroots organizing and not a top-down kind of thing. So the fact of seeing all that in practice like living it and experiencing it, whether as a participant or a somewhat observer, it has definitely had long-term impact. And it's not something you can take for granted that, like students in a classroom, they're not necessarily thinking that way when they come into an institution which has its rules and policies. So to actually work not just in my filmmaking, but as a teacher, to have those values, that's part of where those got instilled. I think that